Hello and welcome to another edition of Coffee Talk with Immigration Attorney Brian D. Lerner. I hope that this mic I'm using is clear. If not, just send me off a comment and I'll get one eventually that is super crystal clear. I'd like to talk in this particular video about orphan petitions. Okay, um, there are different ways of bringing kids into the United States and different petitions that they might qualify for, but one of them is called the Orphan Petition. Now, I get on different occasions, I get somebody, usually the aunt or the uncle, they'll call me up and go, look, I want to bring in my niece and or nephew, and I'd like to adopt them and have them come into the United States. And the first thing I ask them, I go, well, where are the parents? And many times they'll say, well, they're in the house where the child is being raised, but they don't have the money to raise the child anymore, or they want the child to have a better life, and it's not going to happen there. Um, you know, and so and that's the first clue that there's going to be issues with an orphan petition. You have to understand that with adoption petitions, which that is another category, similar but another category, the requirement is that the person who wants to adopt have lived in the physical custody with the child for 2 years before everything's going to go through. So with an adoption petition, there is simply no way that for example, the uncle is going to be able to just want to petition the child to come over to the United States and adopt them. It won't happen because there's been no 2 years, for the most part, no 2 years of living with that child. So the first thing is, what really is the definition of an orphan? Well, we all know what the classic definition would be. Some baby who's left on the doorsteps of a church crying, and both parents are gone and never to be heard from again. Of course, that is an orphan for sure. But what about in the case where the parents are still with the child, but they're unable to raise the child for whatever reason, for financial reasons, they want the child to have a better life, whatever it is. If the parents will agree, and this has to be in writing, it has to be binding, and they have to mean it, that they are legally abandoning the child, that they will never want any type of immigration benefit from that child again, and that they know that once that child is adopted, that there will be no petitions later in life from the child to them. I've had clients who have called actually the child when the child grows up. I've had those people call me and say, well, they were adopted and now they want to petition their biological parents. Well, that's not happening. Okay, so if the abandonment letters are sufficient, then even though the parents are still living with the child, and if done properly, you can still define the child as an orphan. Now, once the child is defined as an orphan, whether it's because there's been an abandonment legally from the parents, or whether there's been an actual abandonment, whether the child is in foster care, whether the child is in an orphanage, whatever the situation is, once the definition of orphan is established and the baby or the child who wants to be, who the parents want to bring in are defined sufficiently as an orphan, then you can move to the next step. Now, with an orphan petition, there's what's called a home study requirement. Now, the home study requirement is basically an organization designated by immigration. There's several of them. And what they do is they will come over to your house, your apartment, your condo, wherever you live, and they will do a full-fledged investigation on you to make sure that you are capable and that you are appropriate to be bringing a child in from another country. And of course, they do the criminal checks, the psychological checks. They interview you. They come back, just like with the movies, where they make sure that everything's okay in the house, and they do follow-ups, and in addition to other costs. Basically the cost to get one of these home study reports is $1,000 to $2,000, but the home study report is necessary to attach to the orphan petition. Now, assuming that you have that done, you define the orphan, you have the home study report finished. Now, in order to do an orphan petition, it actually is possible to do it without defining who the orphan is initially. But most people, they will know who the orphan will be, and they will start the petition in order to go forward. Now, there's two parts to the orphan petition. One is, classifying the child as an orphan. The other is the authorization to bring the orphan in. Now, of course, as part of the process, you do have to adopt the orphan. There's not the requirement for the 2 years of living prior to this, but there will have to be an adoption. So the question becomes, where do you adopt the child? Well, let's say the child comes from some foreign country where adoptions take forever. You're already in this country. There's tons of paperwork that would have to go through, and all the while the child would be waiting there away from you. Well, with the orphan petition, you do have the ability and opportunity to bring the orphan into the United States through the orphan petition, and then adopt the child once the child is inside the United States, which is great. So for the orphan petition, you don't need the 2 years of living with the child. You don't need to have the adoption prior to coming to the United States, so that can all be done here. Now, another thing, you need to have the adoption, once the child does come here, done before the child turns 16. And by me saying done, that means completed, final, and nothing more to do. It's got the judge's signature, it's got everybody's signature on it prior to when the child's 16. There is an exception. If you adopt a sibling, then the sibling can be up to 18. So that really is the only exception. So to be safe, just do it before the child is 16. Now, when the child comes here on an orphan petition, and you conduct the adoption, and everything goes through, then the child will be a lawful permanent resident, and under the certain other laws, assuming that the child entered legally and then became a resident, automatically, if the child's under 18, the child will become a U.S. citizen. So there are a lot of advantages to doing this if it's done right. It's the thing about the orphan petitions is it does take a while. It is quite labor intensive, and it does have several parts to it to make sure that it's done correctly. So if you're planning on going through either an adoption petition or the orphan petition, which is the subject of this particular video, you want to make sure that you have all your I's dotted and all your T's crossed and that everything's done properly. If, for example, the father disappeared and the mother is still raising the child, if the child can be transferred to another relative, and then the mother does the abandonment letter, that would go smoother than the child still living with the mother, for example, and the mother then doing the abandonment letter. So all in all, when people ask me, well, how long does it take to do an orphan petition? Normally, when it's initially started, you can file just the first part, which is going to take around 6 months, and then you can file the second part, which is going to take another 6 months or so, and sometimes longer. Or you could file them both simultaneously. But all in all, if you look around a year to a year and a half, and that may seem like forever, but for immigration purposes, to bring in the orphan and do everything necessary, that's a reasonable amount of time, and then get a good idea of what it's going to cost to do it, so you don't start it and then get shocked by the sticker shock in the middle of it. Again, I told you what the home study report's going to be. That's going to be $1,000 to $2,000. Then you have the attorney's fees, and that'll vary depending what attorney you use, but that's a reasonable amount because it's a very significant amount of work to put these through. And then, of course, there's the adoption fees. Once the child comes and you adopt, there's all kinds of fees that have to be done there. And then there's the filing fees. So all in all, realistically, you should have about $10,000 to $20,000 in your pocket and ready to go to make sure this thing goes smoothly. Honestly, if you try to do an orphan petition by yourself or without proper help, you'd just be going in circles, and the littlest thing could end up getting it denied. So if you're looking to bring an orphan in, give me a call, give you a consultation, and then we'll go from there. Okay, more on the coming video.